Protocol advisor Michael Chen reviewed his briefing materials for the 100th time, while the transport shuttle approached Serenity Station, trying to memorize cultural guidelines that could prevent innocent diplomatic mistakes from triggering interstellar incidents during the most important peace negotiations in human history. Remember, Ambassador Harrison had emphasized during the final briefing on Earth, your job is to ensure that our people follow Kithurian cultural protocols exactly. One misinterpreted gesture or inappropriate comment could derail 2 years of preparation and send us back to a state of armed hostility that benefits nobody, except the people who profit from selling weapons to both sides. No pressure, Michael had replied, though privately he wondered why diplomatic services couldn't develop simpler approaches to avoiding accidentally insulting people whose cooperation was essential for preventing renewed warfare. The Starfall Concordat represented humanity's best hope for establishing lasting peace with the Kithurian Dominion, whose expansion into contested border systems had created the kind of territorial disputes that could either be resolved through negotiation or escalate into conflicts that would consume entire star systems. The Kithurians looked almost human, except for the pointed ears and the bioluminescent markings that shifted patterns based on emotional states that Michael's briefings described as complex social signaling, requiring careful interpretation. The Serenity Station itself was a marvel of neutral architecture, a diplomatic facility constructed by neither human nor Kithurian engineers, but by the consortium of independent worlds, designed to accommodate the cultural requirements of both species, while avoiding any aesthetic choices that might suggest favoritism toward one side or the other. The result was a structure that looked like it had been designed by committee consensus, functional but uninspiring, with conference chambers and observation areas that prioritized diplomatic utility over architectural elegance. Michael's role during the summit was carefully defined: monitor all interactions between delegations for cultural compliance, provide real-time guidance when human representatives approached sensitive topics, and ensure that diplomatic personnel understood the difference between routine conversation and potentially binding cultural commitments. The warnings about Princess Lyrillith are non-negotiable. Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenocultural specialist, had briefed him during the journey to Serenity Station. Under no circumstances should any human attempt direct communication with the Kithurian heir. Her testimony during the summit will determine the final outcome of the negotiations, and any suggestion that her judgment has been influenced by unauthorized contact could invalidate the entire peace process. What kind of testimony? The Kithurians practice something called witness-bearing, where designated individuals evaluate all evidence presented during formal proceedings and provide final judgment on its validity and implications. Dr. Kim's expression had been serious enough to suggest that Michael's understanding of this point was crucial to mission success. Princess Lyrillith's role as witness-bearer means that her words will carry the weight of final authority for the Kithurian delegation. Any compromise of her neutrality would give their hardliners justification for rejecting whatever conclusion she reaches. Michael had spent the remainder of the journey studying the cultural protocols governing witness-bearing and testimony, trying to understand the subtle distinctions between acceptable observation and forbidden influence that could make the difference between successful diplomacy and catastrophic failure. The summit itself took place in Serenity Station's Grand Assembly Chamber, a space that accommodated several hundred representatives from both civilizations, while maintaining the formal distances required by diplomatic protocol. Michael's assigned position was in the observation gallery, where protocol advisors and cultural monitors could observe the proceedings while remaining carefully separated from the actual negotiation process. Princess Lyrillith entered the chamber with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it, moving with grace that suggested extensive formal training while displaying the alert intelligence that marked effective leaders regardless of their species. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed with patterns that Michael's briefings had taught him to recognize as focused attention, mixed with careful evaluation, though the specific meanings of her emotional expressions remained beyond his interpretive abilities. "She's younger than I expected," Michael observed to his colleague, Dr. Martinez, who was monitoring compliance with human diplomatic protocols. 28 years old and already considered one of the most brilliant legal minds in Cytherian space, Dr. Martinez replied quietly. "Her witness-bearing judgments have resolved territorial disputes that conventional diplomacy couldn't touch. Both sides requested her specifically for this summit because her reputation for impartial evaluation is unquestioned." Michael watched Princess Lyrillith take her position at the witness-bearer's station, a raised platform that provided clear sightlines to all participants while maintaining the symbolic separation required by her role as neutral evaluator. Her silence during the opening ceremonies was complete. No words, no gestures, no obvious reactions to the formal presentations that established the framework for the negotiations. "She won't speak until the final testimony phase," Dr. Martinez explained, noting Michael's attention to the princess's behavior. "Cytherian witness-bearing requires complete neutrality during evidence gathering. Any suggestion that she's forming premature judgments could compromise her authority to render final decisions." The first day of proceedings involved formal presentations of territorial claims, economic analyses, and military assessments that painted competing pictures of the border disputes that had brought both civilizations to the edge of war. Michael noted that Princess Lyrillith observed every presentation with the same focused attention, her markings shifting through patterns that suggested complex intellectual processing, but provided no indication of her eventual conclusions. "Impressive discipline," Michael commented as the day's sessions concluded and the delegations dispersed for evening consultations. "Essential discipline," Dr. Martinez corrected. "The entire peace process depends on her ability to evaluate evidence without being influenced by political pressure or personal bias. That's why the protocols about contact with her are so strict. Any compromise of her neutrality would destroy the credibility of whatever judgment she eventually renders." As Michael returned to his quarters to review the day's observations and prepare for the next day's sessions, he found himself thinking about Princess Lyrillith's role in the proceedings and the enormous responsibility that had been placed on someone whose wisdom and impartiality would determine whether two civilizations could build a peaceful future together, or would be condemned to continue the cycle of suspicion and hostility that had dominated their relationship for decades. He had no way of knowing that Princess Lyrillith had been observing him as carefully as he'd been observing the summit proceedings, or that her assessment of his character and professional integrity had led her to conclusions that would soon transform his role from neutral observer to active participant in diplomatic processes that would reshape interstellar relations. But as Michael settled into the routine of monitoring cultural compliance while maintaining appropriate distance from the actual negotiations, he began to sense that the summit's carefully managed protocols might be concealing complexities that would soon require responses not covered in any briefing manual he'd studied. The second day of the summit revealed subtle tensions that Michael's protocol training helped him recognize but didn't fully understand. During testimony about resource extraction rights in the disputed Kepler-47 system, certain officials from both delegations seemed more concerned about preventing specific information from being discussed than about achieving comprehensive resolution of the territorial conflicts. The mining survey data from 2387 appears to be incomplete, observed Ambassador Chen during her presentation to the Assembly. Several key geological assessments that were referenced in preliminary reports are missing from the official documentation. Michael noted that the comment triggered urgent whispered conversations among both human and Cathurian officials, while Princess Lyrillith's markings shifted to patterns that suggested increased attention rather than routine information processing. Technical documentation gaps are common in long-term territorial analyses, replied Minister Velkon from the Cathurian delegation, his tone carrying the diplomatic courtesy that usually concealed more complex political calculations. I'm certain that any missing materials can be located in the appropriate archives if their inclusion becomes necessary for comprehensive evaluation. The exchange was perfectly polite and procedurally correct, but Michael's experience with diplomatic communication flagged it as the kind of careful non-answer that usually indicated someone was avoiding discussions they preferred not to have. During the morning break, Michael was reviewing compliance protocols in the observation gallery when Princess Lyrillith entered the space and deliberately selected the seat directly beside him, despite the presence of numerous empty locations throughout the area. Michael's immediate reaction was panic tempered by professional training. Every briefing he'd received had emphasized that direct contact with the princess was absolutely forbidden, while her choice to sit beside him clearly violated the neutral separation that was supposed to govern her interactions with all summit participants. "Your Highness," Michael said carefully, employing the minimal courtesy required by diplomatic protocol while trying to determine whether he should immediately relocate to maintain proper distance. "I hope you'll understand that my assignment requires me to avoid any interaction that might compromise the integrity of the witness-bearing process." Princess Lyrillith said nothing, her silence complete and deliberate. She simply sat beside him with the kind of composed attention that suggested her choice of location was neither accidental nor casual, though she made no attempt at conversation or obvious communication. Michael found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to follow protocols that had never anticipated this exact situation. The briefings had been clear about avoiding contact with the princess, but they hadn't specified what to do if she initiated contact herself, especially contact that involved no words or apparent communication beyond simple proximity. "Dr. Martinez," Michael whispered into his communication device, "I need immediate guidance on a protocol situation that's not covered in the standard briefings." "What kind of situation?" "The kind where Princess Lyrillith has chosen to sit beside me in the observation gallery, and I'm not sure whether acknowledging her presence constitutes forbidden contact, or whether ignoring it would be diplomatic discourtesy." The silence from Dr. Martinez lasted long enough to suggest that Michael's situation was as unprecedented as he'd feared. "Maintain your current position while I consult with the cultural specialists. Do not initiate any conversation, but don't leave the area unless she does first. We need to determine what cultural protocols might be involved before we risk making the situation worse." Michael remained in his seat while Princess Lyrillith maintained her silent presence beside him, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with patterns that seemed more complex and purposeful than simple emotional expression. Around them, other protocol monitors and cultural observers began noticing the unprecedented seating arrangement, creating the kind of urgent whispered consultations that suggested everyone recognized the significance of something they didn't understand. "Mr. Chen," came Dr. Kim's voice through his communication system, "we need to discuss your situation immediately. What you're experiencing may have activated cultural protocols that could affect the entire summit." The emergency consultation took place in a secure briefing room, whose privacy systems ensured that their conversation remained confidential, while cultural experts attempted to determine what Princess Lyrillith's choice might mean according to Cathurian law and custom. "The listening right," Dr. Kim announced after consulting databases that Michael had never seen before, "is an ancient Cathurian practice that allows witness bearers to select companions who can channel their testimony when direct speech would be politically impossible or culturally inappropriate. Meaning that Princess Lyrillith's choice to sit beside you may have activated legal protocols that bind you as her witness companion, granting you access to protected information while creating a formal pathway for her to transmit testimony through your voice rather than her own. Michael stared at the assembled experts, processing the information that his attempts to avoid compromising the princess's neutrality had somehow resulted in his being legally bound to her testimony process. The implications are significant, added Minister Torres from the human delegation, whose expression suggested he was calculating political ramifications that extended far beyond protocol compliance. If the listening right has been activated, Mr. Chen now has standing as Princess Lyrillith's chosen representative, with access to classified information and authority to speak on her behalf during the final testimony phase. Access to classified information that could provide valuable intelligence about Cathurian decision-making processes, pointed out General Hayes, whose tactical thinking immediately identified strategic advantages rather than diplomatic complications. Intelligence that was never intended for human access, Michael said firmly, recognizing the direction the conversation was taking. If Princess Lyrillith has chosen me as her witness companion, it's because she trusts me to honor the responsibility rather than exploit it for strategic advantage. Before the briefing could continue down the path of exploitation versus ethical responsibility, Michael's communication device chimed with an urgent message from Princess Lyrillith. "Michael, we must meet privately. There are revelations that cannot be shared through normal diplomatic channels, and time is running short to prevent catastrophic decisions based on incomplete information." The message was transmitted through communication networks that Michael was certain he hadn't had access to that morning, suggesting that the listening right had indeed granted him privileges and responsibilities that transformed his role from neutral observer to active participant in proceedings whose outcome would determine the fate of both civilizations. "Your Highness," Michael replied through the secure channel, "I'm willing to fulfill whatever responsibilities the listening right requires, though I should mention that my understanding of these protocols is limited to what our cultural specialists have been able to explain in the past hour. That understanding will come through experience rather than explanation," Princess Lyrillith responded, her message carrying undertones that suggested both urgency and carefully controlled hope. "What matters is whether you're willing to serve truth rather than political convenience, even when truth creates complications that those in power would prefer to avoid." As Michael prepared to meet with Princess Lyrillith for discussions that would either advance the cause of peace or create the kind of diplomatic crisis that could restart the very conflicts the summit was supposed to resolve, he realized that his carefully planned role as neutral protocol observer had evolved into something that would either help expose the truth or become complicit in concealing it. The only question was whether he was prepared to handle responsibilities that his training had never covered, in service to principles he was still learning to understand. The private meeting with Princess Lyrillith took place in a secure chamber, whose existence Michael hadn't known about until his witness companion status granted him access to restricted areas of Serenity Station. The room's architecture seemed designed to facilitate confidential communication, with sound-dampening systems and privacy fields that ensured their conversation would remain undetected by surveillance equipment from either delegation. The listening right recognizes bonds between truth-bearers and those willing to serve truth regardless of personal cost, Princess Lyrillith explained, her first words to Michael carrying formal weight that transformed their interaction from diplomatic protocol into something considerably more significant. "Your selection was not random, Michael Chen. I have observed your professional conduct and concluded that you possess the integrity necessary to hear what must be heard and speak what must be spoken. Your Highness, I should clarify that my understanding of Cathurian cultural practices is limited to basic diplomatic briefings. If you're placing important responsibilities on me, I need to understand exactly what those responsibilities involve. They involve bearing witness to evidence that has been suppressed, altered, or destroyed by officials from both our governments who prefer profitable instability to lasting peace. Princess Lyrillith activated holographic displays that showed documentation Michael was certain he wasn't supposed to have clearance to see. The listening right grants you access to protected information networks so that truth can be preserved and transmitted even when normal diplomatic channels have been compromised. Michael studied the displays, seeing communication logs, financial records, and coordination protocols that painted a picture of systematic manipulation spanning both delegations. You're saying the summit has been sabotaged from within. I'm saying that certain officials have been working together to ensure that the peace negotiations fail, while creating justifications for resumed hostilities that benefit arms manufacturers and military contractors on both sides. Princess Lyrillith pulled up specific examples that made Michael's understanding of the situation shift dramatically. The missing geological surveys that Ambassador Chen mentioned yesterday. They were removed because they prove that the disputed territories contain rare mineral deposits that are worth considerably more than either government has publicly acknowledged. Removed by whom? By a conspiracy that includes Minister Velcon from my delegation and General Hayes from yours, coordinating through private communication channels to suppress evidence that would support peaceful resource-sharing agreements. Princess Lyrillith's markings shifted to patterns that Michael was learning to interpret as controlled anger mixed with determined resolve. They profit more from continued territorial disputes than from resolved boundaries that would reduce military expenditures and weapons purchases. Michael examined the evidence that Princess Lyrillith's access to protected systems had uncovered, seeing the scope of coordination between supposedly opposing officials whose shared interest in maintaining profitable conflict had led them to collaborate against peace initiatives they were publicly supposed to support. The listening right allows you to transmit this information during the final testimony phase, he said, understanding the implications. But doing so would require you to accuse officials from both delegations of conspiracy and treason. Accusations that I cannot make directly without triggering the very conflicts the conspirators are trying to provoke, Princess Lyrillith replied, moving closer so that the chamber's enhanced privacy systems would ensure complete confidentiality. But accusations that my chosen witness companion can voice on my behalf, channeling my testimony through someone whose integrity cannot be questioned by either side. Michael looked at the evidence that would either save or doom the peace negotiations, realizing that his role as witness companion required him to choose between exposing conspiracy and maintaining the diplomatic stability that everyone had been working to preserve. If I speak this testimony during the final session, I become a permanent target for elimination by people who view dead witnesses as preferable to living proof of their crimes. If you don't speak this testimony, the summit fails according to their plan, hostilities resume, and thousands of people die in conflicts that could have been prevented by truth and transparency. Princess Lyrillith's expression grew serious. The listening right protects witness companions through ancient laws that both our peoples recognize as sacred, but it cannot protect against every form of retaliation that desperate people might attempt. And if the testimony succeeds in exposing the conspiracy, then the peace negotiations can proceed based on complete information rather than deliberate misinformation. And both our civilizations have the opportunity to build a future based on cooperation rather than manipulation. Princess Lyrillith's markings shifted to patterns that suggested hope mixed with barely controlled fear. But success requires you to trust me completely, just as I am trusting you with information that could either save or destroy everything we're trying to accomplish. Michael considered the choice that would determine not just his personal future, but the fate of peace negotiations that represented the best hope for ending conflicts that had consumed resources and lives for decades. "Your Highness," he said finally, "before I commit to this responsibility, I need to understand something." "Why me?" There were other protocol observers in that gallery, people with more experience in interstellar diplomacy and cultural interpretation. "Because when I observed your reactions to the suppressed evidence discussions, you displayed concern for truth rather than calculation about political advantage. Because your questions about missing documentation were motivated by genuine desire to understand rather than strategic positioning." Princess Lyrillith's smile was subtle but genuine. "And because when officials from both sides avoided discussing inconvenient facts, your markings, if humans had such things, would have shown frustration with dishonesty rather than satisfaction with successful evasion." "You can read human expressions that accurately. I can read character that transcends species differences. The listening right recognizes truth-bearers regardless of their origin or training." Princess Lyrillith activated another display, this one showing communication intercepts that revealed the conspiracy's timeline for triggering summit failure. They plan to provoke a diplomatic incident during tomorrow's final session, using manufactured evidence to claim that one side has been negotiating in bad faith, unless we expose their manipulation first. As emergency alerts began activating throughout Serenity Station, indicating that the conspiracy had realized their communications were being monitored and had decided to accelerate their timeline for destroying the peace process, Michael realized that his choice was no longer theoretical. "Princess," he said, accepting responsibilities that his protocol training had never covered, "if you're willing to trust me with the truth, I'm willing to serve as your voice in speaking it, regardless of the consequences." Princess Lyrillith's smile was radiant enough to activate the chamber's bioluminescent response systems. "Michael," she said, his name carrying warmth and formality that suggested she was speaking as both princess and person, "I think that's exactly why the listening right guided me to choose you." As they prepared to expose conspiracy that could either save the peace negotiations or destroy both their careers while triggering the very conflicts they were trying to prevent, Michael realized that his role as cultural protocol observer had evolved into something that would either help build bridges between civilizations or provide ammunition for those who preferred to burn such bridges down. The only question was whether his commitment to truth would prove stronger than the forces arrayed against it. The conspiracy moved against them during the night shift when Serenity Station's security protocols were at their most vulnerable, launching coordinated attempts to eliminate both Michael and Princess Lyrillith before the final testimony session could expose the systematic manipulation that had been poisoning the peace negotiations from within. "Multiple security breaches detected," announced the station's artificial intelligence as emergency systems activated throughout the diplomatic facility. "Unauthorized personnel are accessing restricted areas with override codes that should not exist in current authorization databases." Michael and Princess Lyrillith were in the secure testimony preparation chamber when the assault began, surrounded by evidence that would either save or doom the peace process, while under attack from people who had decided that dead witnesses were preferable to living testimony about their crimes. "They're not waiting for the formal session," Michael observed, watching tactical displays that showed armed personnel from both delegations moving through the station with military precision. "They've decided to eliminate us before we can expose their coordination. Which means our choice is no longer whether to reveal the conspiracy through formal testimony," Princess Lyrillith replied, activating defensive systems that Michael hadn't known existed until the listening right granted him access to Cathurian security protocols. Our choice is whether to complete the witness bonding ceremony while under attack, or die separately while the war profiteers succeed in destroying the peace process. The formal activation of the listening rite was remarkably simple for a ceremony with such profound implications. An exchange of commitments that acknowledged mutual trust and responsibility, while activating ancient systems that recognized bonds transcending political calculation. As explosions echoed through the station and attacking forces fought their way through defensive barriers, Michael and Princess Lyrillith spoke the words that would bind their fates together permanently, while simultaneously broadcasting evidence of the conspiracy to authorities throughout both civilizations. "I accept the responsibility to speak truth regardless of personal cost," Michael said, his voice carrying across communication networks that reached governmental and military authorities throughout human space. "I pledge to serve as witness companion to Princess Lyrillith, channeling her testimony with integrity and courage. I recognize Michael Chen as my chosen voice, worthy of trust and capable of bearing truth that others would suppress," Princess Lyrillith replied, her words triggering security protocols that transformed their location into an impregnable sanctuary, while broadcast systems throughout the station transmitted evidence of the war profiteering conspiracy. "I grant him authority to speak my testimony and reveal what must be revealed for peace to prevail over profit." The moment their bonding was complete, the station's enhanced defensive systems activated with authority that neither the attacking human nor Cathurian forces had anticipated, while emergency communication arrays transmitted documented proof of the conspiracy to news networks and governmental authorities across multiple star systems. "This is Admiral Santos of the Human Defense Fleet," came a transmission from loyal forces responding to the evidence broadcasts. "We have confirmation of the conspiracy allegations and are moving to arrest personnel involved in the unauthorized assault on Serenity Station." "This is High Commander Veltara of the Cathurian Guard," came a parallel response from their military hierarchy. "The treasonous elements within our delegation are being taken into custody, and we are coordinating with human authorities to ensure the safety of Princess Lyrillith and her chosen witness companion." The formal testimony session that followed took place under heavy security, with Michael serving as Princess Lyrillith's voice in presenting evidence that had been systematically suppressed by officials whose commitment to peace had been compromised by their investments in continued conflict. The geological surveys that were removed from official documentation, Michael announced, speaking Princess Lyrillith's testimony to the assembled delegates, prove that the disputed Kepler-47 system contains rare mineral deposits worth approximately 40 trillion credits, enough to fund peaceful development for both civilizations or profitable warfare for generations, depending on how the territorial rights are resolved. The evidence presentation continued for hours, with Michael channeling Princess Lyrillith's analysis of communication intercepts, financial records, and coordination protocols that revealed the scope of the conspiracy, while demonstrating how the manipulation had been designed to prevent successful resolution of territorial disputes. Minister Velcon and General Hayes were not representing opposing interests, Michael continued, his voice carrying the authority of formal witness-bearing. They were implementing a coordinated business plan that required the failure of peace negotiations to maintain revenue streams that had enriched both of them at the cost of thousands of lives. The trials that followed revealed the full scope of the war profiteering network that had been manipulating both governments, while the successful completion of the peace negotiations under new transparency protocols proved that cooperation was not only possible but more effective than the conflict that had been artificially maintained for financial benefit. "So," Michael said 6 months later, reviewing reports from the Joint Oversight Commission while serving in his new role as Director of Interspecies Communication Integrity, "we've exposed a criminal conspiracy, established new protocols for diplomatic transparency, and proved that truth-telling is more effective than strategic deception for building lasting peace. An impressive list of accomplishments for someone whose only intention was to ensure compliance with cultural protocols. Princess Lyrillith agreed, watching their latest project, a communication network that allowed witness-bearing and truth-telling between species without the political complications that had previously made honest testimony impossible. Michael looked around their shared office, where impossible partnerships between former protocol observers and alien royalty were creating diplomatic innovations that served truth rather than political convenience. "You know," he said, taking her hand while marveling at the way her bioluminescent markings seemed to pulse in harmony with his heartbeat. "When I accepted that protocol advisor assignment, the most complicated outcome I imagined was maybe having to explain to some diplomat why their casual comment about resource allocation could be interpreted as a territorial claim. And instead I accidentally activated ancient witness-bearing laws, exposed interstellar conspiracies, became permanently bonded to the most brilliant legal mind in Cathurian space, and somehow managed to help prevent a war while falling in love with someone whose idea of romantic conversation involves reviewing evidence protocols and testimony validation procedures. More complex than routine diplomatic oversight. Much more complex than anything they covered in protocol training, but exactly as complex as it needed to be. Michael squeezed her hand gently, noting how her markings shifted to patterns that spoke of deep contentment and boundless affection. "Besides, I've discovered that the most important protocols aren't about following rules. They're about recognizing when rules should be transcended in service of truth." Princess Lyrillith laughed, her joy creating harmonics that made their office equipment resonate in sympathy. Even when transcending rules requires accepting responsibilities that transform cultural observers into active participants in reshaping interstellar relations. Especially then, some silences speak louder than words, and some witnesses serve truth better than those who speak only when it's politically convenient. As they continued their work developing communication protocols that served transparency rather than manipulation, Michael reflected on how dramatically his understanding of his purpose had evolved. He'd started as someone who helped others avoid cultural mistakes that could damage diplomatic relationships, and somehow become someone who helped entire civilizations